Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 160 for January the 1st, 2020. And I'm sure it will be a challenge to get that rolling off the tongue as 2019 has for the past 365 days. So my name is Wes Fryer, and I'm coming to you from very mild, balmy Oklahoma City. It's gotten a little bit cooler, but we had one of the warmer Christmas days on record. I think it got up into the low 70s, something like 72 or something, kind of crazy. But I am the technology integration and innovation specialist. I still have to really think about that at the Cassidy School here in wonderful Oklahoma City. And I'm joined as always by the guru of the North, as he is known by some, Dr. Jason Neiffer. Dr. Neiffer, happy holidays, happy Festivus. I understand you've been washing away, being covered up with snow in Missoula.
Yes, that's true. I am joining you tonight from Missoula, Montana, where I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, and we've had a really wet Christmas season here, and I don't really know what to account for that other than general warming trends, but we tend to get a lot of rain now in the fall, kind of like Seattle or Portland might, and then our snow tends to come a little later. So we had a little bit of snow on and off the last couple of weeks, but mostly, especially in the last 72 hours, it's been mostly rain, and so now it's avalanche season here in western Montana as rain and snow join together to build up big bulk of things. But while I'd love to talk about Montana weather, which is a topic that Montanans do really enjoy talking about, that's not what this show is about. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room about?
Well, Jason, we are a weekly EdTech focused, educational technology focused show where we look at the past week's news through an educational lens, as it were. And we have, you can go back because we have 160 shows of links in our Google Doc, which you can find at edtechsr.com/links. But tonight is definitely going to be, close to the record books in terms of the number of links. So we will not be getting through all of these, in part because we took Christmas Day off last week. And also the week before, we had an end of the year tech shopping cart, ideas for your family, friends, and others that you're buying tech gifts for. And so we actually skipped a week, 2 weeks of tech news. And even though the holiday season may not be the busiest time for announcements and things like that, there is a lot going on. And so I just started to read the first article that Jason put in and, fell into a rabbit hole of, 100 different things. So we could do a show alone on that one. But where would you like to begin? And not to say that we have to start with that one. Where would you like to begin? And just to give everyone a preview, because if you do look at the Google Doc, unlike our episodes, which kind of sometimes list chronologically what we talk about, I just usually try to get all the links in there. We have categories. So categories are tonight, Alex, looking forward, looking back, the technology correction, drones, space surveillance, social media, media literacy, security, digital ethics, the lovely miscellaneous category, which only has one article tonight, a book recommendation, and then our Geeks of the Week, which we always save for last. So, Dr. Neiffer, where shall we begin tonight?
Well, let's make sure this doesn't turn to a rabbit hole, but let's start out with the kind of looking forward, looking back articles. And I, of course, have not been surprised that the last 2 weeks of media have been really dominated by end-of-decade coverage because we are at the end of the 2010s, and some calendar nerds will tell you that the decade actually doesn't end until next year, but we'll just pretend, since the numbers could conveniently play that way when they're written down, that we are at the end of a decade. And, let's be honest, it's been an extraordinary 10 years in technology development, and I know both Wes and I have referred to this in a lot of the ways I tend to reframe talks that I do with teachers and administrators at conferences to talk about the speed at which technology has been impacting our culture. And there's just no comparison, even in the major technological evolutions like the printing press, various agricultural revolutions. Nothing has spread as quickly as the internet or caused so much cultural change. And yet here we are, arguably in the second full decade of the kind of technology revolution, and we're at a bit of a crossroads. So, Wes, you referred to an interesting article. Audrey Waters, who writes at the Hack Education blog, released her 100 worst EdTech debacles of the decade, and really took to task a lot of technology. For those of you unaware of Audrey's work, I guess she would be probably best described as the maintaining the warning about when technology fails. And I don't really quite get what her advocacy is of what she would prefer. Obviously, I agree with her on a lot of the cases that a lot of oversold and over hyped technology has done us almost no good. In a lot of cases, introduced a lot of risk into this part of the educational industry. But I want to, for a moment, juxtaposition that against another article from another prominent voice in the edtechosphere. This is Dean Shirsky, who's been around for 3 decades now in kind of the edtech world. And he released an interesting blog post earlier this week called "I Don't Think I'm an EdTech Guy Anymore," and talked through this notion that he's not an EdTech guy, he's an education guy now. And so one of the things I think we need to spend some time reflecting on broadly in education is that a lot of things are disappointments when they're introduced. A lot of innovations that promise to change everything haven't changed everything. And the one I know a lot about, because I've done a lot of academic research on it, is the so-called invention of MOOCs, the massive open online courses that were a huge rage 9-10 years ago, at the beginning of the 2010s, that were going to democratize education and bring it to the masses and decrease the cost of college. And I thought at the time that the model didn't have enough to do that. It couldn't replace formal academic structures that tend to dominate our upper secondary and higher education, not just in the United States and around the world, but that they wouldn't replace college, which is a constant theme of X, Y, and Z is going to replace college, and X, Y, and Z is going to make college less valuable. And yet there's still extraordinary data that you're better off getting a college education than if you aren't. So ignoring that rabbit hole for a second, I think one of the things that I want to say is, as you're examining these articles and as you're reflecting on what the last 10 years or 20 years of EdTech has done, I still think we have to remember that, taking Dean's point into account, that it's got to be about the education first, right? Education technology, if it's not about tech in the classroom, it's about good teaching in the classroom. If you can use technology to augment that, if you can use technology to enhance that, in some cases, if you can use technology to replace that, I think that's the goal. We have to be able to say it's the education first. And in fact, I find myself talking a lot about my own conference presentations used to be a lot more like, here's how you do X and here's how you do Y and here's how you use tool Z. Whereas now I want to talk a little bit more with teachers and administrators and those interested in our industry about how you should be approaching this to make sure that you're using the maximum impact for student learning in a classroom. Sometimes that means more technology. Sometimes that means less. Sometimes that means taking technology that we've come to trust and questioning the assumptions and looking at it differently, always putting that student learning lens on. So, there's a lot of talk in the Hack Education article about, the over-promising of Silicon Valley and all the initiatives that gone into initiatives, many of which were aimed at revolutionizing the education world. But to be honest, I think in a lot of those cases, those efforts failed, not because there wasn't enough money available, and not because technology itself is suspect. It is because education wasn't the priority. We didn't put into the priority position the lens of student learning, and that's got to always be first. So, I could spend the next hour talking about that. I don't want to do that, partly because I know West has a lot of thoughts about this as well. But one of the things that I think is important is that as we are looking, in the coming months, years, decades, that this is an opportunity for us. We are at a crossroads, I think, about picking tech. It's not about banning or even going all in. It's about finding which middle ground best serves student learning.
I do have a few thoughts about that. I want to mention though, we've had a few live viewers. We've got 3 now. We've been up to 5. If you're tuning in either on YouTube Live or on Facebook Live, if you want to put any questions or comments or just shout outs into the chat, we are both able to see those here in our lovely StreamYard interface, and we can reply to those or give those voice if you want to contribute to our conversation here. I think, I have a lot of respect for Audrey Waters. However, I'll also say she is a much more bitter person, I think, perhaps than I am as I look at a lot of these topics. I think this is I didn't get through this whole article, right? There are literally 100 different things in here that she calls debacles of the decade. But the way I see this being very helpful, I mean, this is not a who's who list, but kind of a like background stuff. Like these are all things that if you are involved in educational technology, and you could arguably say, in education today, because digital technology plays an increasingly important role in multiple aspects of learning. These are things that are important to know about. And some of these are lessons to learn, to be aware of what happened there and maybe what could be avoided. But there's a lot of things that are really awesome and are good, I think have tremendous power and tremendous benefit. And so, Audrey is casting a lot of these things, for instance, like flipped learning as just a debacle and, a crock. And as you say, I think part of that is because of the language in which sometimes it's spun in popular media, mainstream media, but also the EdTech, blogosphere and whatever you want to call, those of us out on the social media platform sharing, talking about a learning revolution and things like that. Oh gosh, it didn't, completely change everything. But goodness gracious, I've been reflecting on this a little bit. There was an article here over the break that I think Kim Case shared. It was about Australia. This was from the summer, but this was, families lamenting the expense of laptops and just how, they weren't worth it, and, doing away with iPads or things like that with one-to-one learning. I mean, there are so many ways that digital learning and the sharing of ideas, absolutely is transformative in our society today in terms of the way news happens, in terms of politics, and then the impact on economics. But also, all of us just experienced or might still be, if you haven't gone back to school yet. I'm guessing most of us haven't, right? It is, January the 1st, the most connected holiday you've ever had, right? I mean, the ability to simultaneously, if you're on Facebook and maybe other platforms, but for me, it's mostly, via Facebook, to be more connected to family and friends and, having conversations with people that I wouldn't be having otherwise, getting glimpses. And we can talk about how, the fear of missing out culture and the way in which, social media challenges identity, and it causes people sometimes to project things that is more of an aspirational and even fake identity versus their real identity, yada, yada, yada. I mean, we can be bitter and upset about it, but I think we also need to recognize there are really powerful and positive ways in which this, transforms our lives. And so while there's, like I said, this list from Audrey is really a great one in terms of, are you aware of these things? I mean, one of the things she talked about, I didn't know that David Wiley, this whole lawsuit, between Pearson and the way that Follett acquired this, but, David with his, I didn't realize that he had his own platform called Lumen Learning, and he's archived all this. I mean, there's a lot of follow-ups with links to, different stories.
More research.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of commentary I can give to different ones. A couple I'll say is, Ning, this is huge. We're about to, actually this month, now that it's January, to cease operations as a 501c3 nonprofit for story chasers that, we've been in operation there, I think since 2009. So it's been about 10 years. And we fell into that trap, as so many people did, of putting content into a paid platform, Ning, and then having that content not readily grabbable, not readily mobile, I guess, in terms of portable. That's the word, is data portability. And so anyway, there's lots of lessons learned within all of this, but there's one more I'll comment on, and then we can go on to something else. But and thanks for the shout out, by the way, for Dean's article. I hadn't seen that yet. And I think that's a great thing to, give voice to and to recognize. And of course, I'm on that same page that, it's about the learning. It always has been about the learning, by the way. Many of us, get sometimes distracted, but enamored, with flashy lights and buttons and things. But in part, it's because these tools allow us to do things we either couldn't do before, or we weren't able to do at scale in the ways that we can do them, now. But that 3D printing article, gives you the idea. It's just no freaking big deal, right? It's just all hoopla. And this is number 93 on Audrey's list. Look, I was just at Tinker Air Force Base yesterday with our son. A couple of months ago, we had a chance to take about 12 people from our school there. It's about a $2.3 billion operation to be taking care of every jet engine in the inventory of the Air Force. So that right here in Oklahoma City, all of the jet engines, not the rocket engines, those are at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. But there's 3 different, what they're called, air logistics centers. And so anyway, Alexander's graduating, in May as a mechanical engineer. And, I'm interested in connecting him to the possibilities that are there. I mean, one of the things that their chief engineer said during our tour, and I think he had said this before, is that 3D printing has been a fundamental game changer for them in terms of engineering, because before 3D printing, the majority of engineers would design things in 2D for a 3D world. Now with 3D, software, SolidWorks, we use Tinkercad as a lower level, but Alexander, I think SolidWorks has been what he's used in his engineering program at the Colorado School of Mines. That's what they're using there. And so engineers are doing far more design in 3D for the 3D world. And it's a game changer. I mean, we were there a couple months ago, and they have $1.5 million machine that takes powdered metal. And sometime on a show, because I don't think I put it somewhere in our house, I got a discarded piece of metal that they had created. They can fabricate not today any kind of metal, and jet engines, by the way, are pretty demanding, and so it's not the case where they can fabricate any kind of metal today that they want. But it is phenomenal. It's huge. And so simply saying, hey, this is all a crock, it's not a game changer at all, is false, right? In terms of the impact it's having on society today, not, in the years in the future. It depends where you are, right? And if you happen to be supporting airframes that are going to be flying literally for 100 years, I mean, that's what the KC-135 tanker and some of these airframes are. I mean, it started in the 60s. But anyway, it's interesting to see, not just in the classroom, but in the world outside the classroom, how are these things being utilized? And then, that's of course the impact of talking about this stuff, right? We'll talk about an article and a new technology. Well, what impact does that have? And some of that might be that we need our students to be introduced to that, to have those kinds of skills. And so anyway, I think that's a great article to look at. I do like those summative, looking at the year and reflection kind of things. Dr. Neiffer, would you be writing some kind of decade in reflection?
I will not. Well, in part because that I can imagine the extraordinary research that she went through to write that monumental
absolutely
article.
And the links are incredible.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing that you should be very aware of, and this is a part that I very much agree with, we need to stop looking for someone to come in and save schools with tech, because that's not really what the problem is, right? Like I think there are vast issues that we need to address broadly in public schools in the United States, but to claim that technology is in any way the answer there, it's part of the reason why that an organization like mine is sometimes challenging, because people want distance learning to be the answer to a lot of different problems that it really can't be the answer to. And the reality is we don't need we need a lot of things to help move forward the conversation about how to best educate students. And we'll never get to an answer. In fact, I don't think that there will be an answer to that, because I think our culture demands different things out of schools at different times. And obviously what has happened in schools broadly in the last 50 years has been impacted the way our culture approaches schools. But I think avoiding Messiah mentality in regards to technology, the notion that it's clear that a lot of promises have been broken. And I think also people really want it to be easier to educate kids, and it's not. It's a difficult, complex, messy business because it's a people business, right? And we don't get all the same kids that come into our classroom. They're not widgets. They're human beings in a context. And in the same way too, that technology has promised to make personalization better. There's a lot of research that says that there is no benefit, no clearly identified benefit to personalization as the way it's described in 2020. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make education more personal. I think that's a big difference between the two. And one of the ways we might do that is with more resources for schools. So that I think if we had more opportunities for students, if we could work with them, not necessarily to give them a variety of choices, but to find the right environment for them in the context of the institutions which we built, I think that's a really important part of this conversation.
And let's look at the instructional strategies, right? Because technology can be it can be utilized in different instructional strategies. My wife went to Harvard with half of the teachers at our lower school this summer, and Project Zero is focused now a lot on making thinking visible, right? There are so many wonderful ways that tech can do that, and that we, get to bring content in and then give students opportunities to communicate in different ways. So,
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'd like to jump down to a security topic. So, here we're 22 minutes into the show, and we've covered 2 articles, folks. That's all right. You're getting more than you're paying for here with the show. So I don't think we're going to have lots of complaints. Although I realize, looking at these links, we could be doing a 3-hour show and not a 1 hour. So anyway, security. Talked about this on the show. I actually have one of these now in my possession. This is the YubiKey 5CI, which is USB-C and Lightning connector here. This is a physical key. One of the things I have been wading through, and I'm not done with yet, is you can go through your Google Chrome password checkup, and you can do that with your other password managers. It is just so important today that we use very long, complex passwords that are unique to every single website, and that when we turn on two-factor authentication, which means you need to have something else in your physical possession to authenticate on a new device. And so, phones and smartphones, SMS is a technology that will let you verify that, but that is potentially hackable. So on the security note, I think you had actually dropped a couple articles related to this. The one I want to pick up is from the New York Post on December 29th. Man sues Ring after creep hacked device taunted kids. And this article goes on to explain how, the lawsuit here is blaming Amazon for what they said was, hey, you got hacked and this, creepy guy talked to my kids. And it happened a couple times, like one time in someone's bedroom, and he claimed to be Santa. It was very creepy. And then another one, they had like a camera up above their basketball rim. And I think the hacker was talking to, kids playing basketball. But what the article says that they determined was no breach. It was password reuse. And so this is huge. This is one of the most important things all of us can put on our list of New Year's resolutions, is to not just start today using secure passwords, but to go back into your accounts, especially anything that has a credit card or anything to do with finance. You probably have that one special password that you've used since forever, on so many different sites. And that's what, the password checker on Google Chrome, as well as, LastPass and 1Password, they call them different things, but they'll go in and check all your saved passwords against known breaches. And so this article, and I've seen some others as well, point to the fact, the other one was when Disney Plus came out. I think we did this on the show a few weeks ago. There were a number of people who had their Disney Plus accounts hacked. Oh my gosh, Disney Plus got hacked. No, they didn't. People's username and password has been breached elsewhere by Equifax or Target or whatever. And so hackers go on the dark web, they get your email address and that password, and they go, I wonder if this person signed up for Disney Plus. Oh, look, they have. And then they have access to your account and they control it. So I really think being safe, password security, and talking about multi-factor authentication. And I'm trying to, I think, kind of live into the future, because I think this is where we're all going. We're going to biometrics, right? But short of being able to use a biometric device on, all the systems that we have to log into, having some kind of a physical security key is really, where we're headed, and where those folks who are taking security the most seriously, that's where they're living today. And so I have not yet turned off my SMS and all my other ways of logging in and authenticating to my Google account. But what I've done is I've printed out my codes. I've printed several copies of those. I'm saving those in safe places, because if I lose this key, if it gets stolen, I'm going to need to get access to my account. How can I do that without the key? And so anyway, I'm going to live with this for a few weeks, but then that is my plan. And my encouragement to all of you is, at a bare minimum, you need to be running these security password check programs, and then going in to change, especially, like I said, any kind of account that has any sort of credit card or money associated with it. And what we've got to protect the most are our email accounts and sort of the accounts that are keys to the kingdom of other things, right? Because once someone has compromised your email account, then it's sort of like they have a master key to go into, almost anything. It could be your bank or whatever. And so anyway, those were good. You added a couple other articles, I think, that were similar. Were those also on that same ring hack, or were those some other things?
It is. I did want to mention, and I'm glad you noted this as part of your article with the ring issue, is that when I read the original article, I was just a little confused about part of the problem here is that it's the balance between security and convenience. And I imagine one of the reasons why Amazon doesn't force you to use two-factor authentication is because it's difficult to maintain and set up if you're not already prone to do that. And Wes and I have talked offline before about how we've been both working towards a much more secure system for our personal and school stuff. But that's taken some time and effort, an extraordinary time and effort. And while I do think that if you're going to use a Ring doorbell and you're going to use that technology, especially that's going to have a camera inside your home that's got a speaker on it, you should absolutely use two-factor authentication. I couldn't agree more with that notion. But my guess is that if Amazon compelled that of end users, then the article would be that Amazon is unnecessarily locking down a technology that could be useful for security, right? Because if you just use a different username and password for every website, then everything would be great. And that's also true, but we have to be realistic that we are not taking seriously, or we're not taking security seriously enough broadly as computer users, right? There, just at schools alone, hundreds of hacks a year that are related to sloppy security practices, and that's a real issue and problem. But I don't think that compelling everyone to immediately adopt the industry standard is going to get us there. We need to instead be pushing our friends and neighbors. We need to be talking to our students about this. We need to be talking to our colleagues about this. We need to be talking to our parents about this. We need to push this along until we come up with better, more secure ways to lock this information down.
Well, and it depends upon your role, right? I agree with you. I think the latest studies, which are a year or so old, were saying only something like 10% of Gmail users globally are using two-factor authentication. So using any kind of two-factor, or even with SMS, that is going to be sort of keeping you safer than most of the other folks out there. But one of the things I'm very proud of and happy about, as I was the technology director at our school for 4 years, was requiring every single person who has a G Suite email account to use two-factor authentication. And that was something we took a year to roll out, and we did, training and one-on-ones with people. And it wasn't something we just, flipped a switch. But I actually have had a chance to talk with our church and be involved in the transition to a new information system to handle all constituent data and financial system and things like that. I'm just part of that team. But one of the things that I just sent an email before the holidays about was to say, hey, I think that we need to transition definitely everyone in the business office who is touching money into two-factor. And then I would suggest, and I'm going to have this conversation, we have a plan where we're going to require everybody, because as a business, that's a little different than saying, hey, this is my house, this is my Ring doorbell, this is, whatever, consumer, IoT. And so I would just, encourage and exhort those who may be listening that have a leadership role in your school or whatever organization. And again, this is like, who's going to take this message to the organizations that you're a part of, right? We don't have these regular little, hey, learn about security, this week kind of sessions in, every organization. And even in ours, I don't think, even though we have like semi-annual meetings, and a lot of times our head of school would let me, say some words, and I'd talk about security as one of my talking points. I don't think we do it enough. So anyway, I want to encourage folks, if you're not already requiring everyone in your school organization to use two-factor authentication, yeah, guess what? It's a pain. But this is the reality that, simply using your email address, which is generally publicly accessible, and so you're only having that password, that's it, that's the only thing. Your tendency is to use a password that is, number one, repeated, and number two, relatively easy to type in. It's just I think we could probably have some really good visual metaphorical descriptions of, sort of like, where you're out there in the jungle, with all kinds of threats that are out there, from snakes to tigers to all kinds of things that could be getting you. And, if you're just sitting in your hammock without a net or any other kind of protection around you, you're kind of crazy, right? You need to be protected with more layers of security. And that is the metaphor that most people use to talk about security. They'll talk about layers of security and layers of protection, because there's not going to be a single silver bullet that's going to protect you. And so you're going to want to do multiple things. And I think as we move further along in the digital world, credentials, keys, all these things. I love my Apple universe, right? I love my, now that I'm back to the iPhone 7, it's Touch ID, but when I was on the 11 Pro, the facial recognition, even though there's creepy sides of that, man, I gotta tell you, it's just awesome. Even in the dark, just look at your device and hey, it recognizes it's me, and we're off to the races. But those technologies are not going to be ubiquitous across all enterprise platforms and things like that. So we're going to need to look at other ways of doing that, and that may not be the sexiest and most exciting type of EdTech we can talk about, but it certainly is one that gets to the heart of every single person's life, because none of us want to be the victim of identity theft, and none of us want to have to take the sometimes years it can take to recover from a security breach where someone has gotten into your life and really messed with it.
Right.
All right. Well, what else should we talk about now that we're halfway through our show?
Yeah, sure. Let me just point out one other article. It was an article from today's USA Today. The reason why I mention it is because it talks about don't fall for this latest prank or trickster fraud, blah, 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 blah. The reason why I liked it is because I am starting to see, like, usually it's pretty obvious to me based on the amount of email that I review, and oftentimes a teacher will forward to me an email that they question it could be a phishing attack. I've seen a lot of phishing emails, and there's usually a glaring issue, right? Like something that should be capitalized, it's not, something that's misspelled, something that's the British or Australian spelling instead of the American spelling is usually a tip-off that it's not correct, or it looks different than other official emails like from the Google platform. But that particular article had some screenshots of what appeared to be looked like a pretty legitimate email, and I think I would have been fooled by that. So definitely keep an eye out. You stay safe out there, kids.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay,
hey, let me do a fun one. Well, fun. It's kind of weird, but this is under the large title "Drone Space Surveillance," and this is from Stars and Stripes magazine, which I'm sure every one of our listeners is tuning into daily. But it's a legit source, which of course is an issue we always have on the show, as we do in our lives. Like, who says this? What is this source? The headline is "Weird and Concerning: Mystery Drone Sightings Continue in Colorado into Nebraska." And I also put a link, and I'll include this in the show notes, to one of the most wonderful features of Google News, which is this little colored icon that stands for full coverage. Because when you take a particular article, it's good to get a spectrum of coverage, right? It's not just Fox News, CNN, but what are these other different news entities doing to talk about, and that'll update. So actually, I'm going to tap on that and choose to open that here in my little iPad extra screen I'm using. That's interesting, huh? That link. I don't know if it's just because that's on the iPad or if that link had actually expired. So maybe I'll have to have to check that link again. What it should show me is a variety of different articles that are about that particular topic. This is totally fascinating. Drones that have a pretty large wingspan, I think it says up to 6 feet in size, are being sighted out in these areas of eastern Colorado. And I guess going into Nebraska, and they apparently fly at night, and they're flying. They might be drug traffickers, they say. I'm reminded of things. There were these things called the Lubbock Lights that were, weird sightings. There was the Marfa Lights, so these other things that were, touted to be UFOs or black helicopters, or what's going on out here in the flat high plains of Texas when I was living, out in Lubbock, or even before that. My granddad on my mom's side was real interested in that kind of stuff. They're apparently not doing anything illegal. And in the article, they encourage folks not to shoot them down, because if you shoot down one of these drones with your shotgun, it's possible that it's going to start a fire, and, that's going to be even more problematic. But we have a Costco here in Oklahoma City, and we are Costco members. And so I noticed that for the holidays, they had an off-the-shelf drone that was like $50. It's a quadcopter that has, an HD camera on it, and it's a fly-by-wire deal. But highly hackable, I'm sure. Our our makerspace teacher had ordered some $12, remote control cars from China. He was hacking those before the holiday to put the circuit playground on, so that they could be programmed by kids to follow a course or whatever. And so anyway, who's running these drones? What are they doing? Drones are going to play an increasing role in our society. I think I included probably a Geek of the Week with this, like Air Force Academy, Air Force Army weekend. Did I show that? Do you remember me mentioning that, where they had like 500 drones that did a light show?
Oh, yeah.
And so, we just had New Year's Eve. There have been drone light shows at, I think, the Chinese Olympics and some other, kinds of things. So we're going to see consumer public event, kinds of uses for drones. But I thought that was pretty interesting, and, a mystery. Where are these drones coming from? That'll be something to kind of catch up on. And I guess the, connection there is that we need our kids to be developing coding skills, right? There's debates about whether it's a foreign language. I speak Spanish relatively well, certainly not a native speaker, but, it's different. I do not think learning to code and program is exactly the same and has all the same benefits, and that we should, let's just let people take Python instead of taking, French, Spanish, German, or whatever. But I do think that, it needs to become a requirement. It needs to become an essential part of what everyone does. Everyone learns to work with data. Everyone learns to work with code. We don't fear those things, and we don't relegate that to just, a few kids over in the corner who, do that on their own for fun. This needs to be a mainstream kind of activity. And as we see things like this, happening with drones and whatnot, anyway, I'm reminded of that. So are you involved in hacking drones and creating drone light shows for your neighbors there in Missoula over the holidays?
I am not. My father-in-law plays around with a drone and likes that a lot. The other coverage this week that also impacts this is the FAA has announced that they will be much more aggressively regulating drones, and drones of a certain size, which my understanding was relatively small, was the bottom end of what they would be regulating, would be forced to have a unique ID number, and then also a means of identifying or registering and identifying the drones. And there have been a couple efforts to register drones by the FAA, many of which had exempted the casual user of the drone. But things like the situation that I hadn't heard that before today. That's an extraordinary thing that's going on in Colorado. But there have been a lot of people that aren't thinking through the consequences of things, do things with drones that really are a question of safety. And, I kind of think about the Back to the Future 2 future, where there's flying cars everywhere, and they had kind of flying highways there. Well, I think the more likely scenario is we're going to have flying highways, but they're going to be made up of drones that, will be delivering things. And like delivery services become more individualized, I have no doubt they will become an important part of our transportation infrastructure.
Well, as I said, our son's, applying for jobs now, and our Save Makerspace teacher, shout out to Eric Sappington, was telling me about an article which I don't have in the notes here, but UPS is looking to hire folks that can code drones because the delivery of blood plasma and medicine and things like that, that's a game changer, right? Being able to get these things that are needed by medical professionals, in their hands to save people's lives. On a related note, that is kind of weird too, but this is a sign of the times. This is December 20th, the South China Morning Post, which again, this is not, Joe Schmo's garage blog. The headline is China flight systems jammed by pig farms' African swine fever defenses. And so what was happening here is criminal gangs in China were spreading infectious diseases so that they could boost the price of pigs. And they had some farmers using unauthorized equipment, which was jamming these drone signals so that they wouldn't come and land and infect their pigs. And so this is actually affecting planes. We're talking commercial flying aircraft, that were flying overhead. And so they detected them and were able to shut this down. But man, that's a wild, sign of the times kind of thing too, where people are trying to be defensive and protect themselves. And, that has an impact on, I don't know if those were international flights. They were probably domestic flights, but whatever. They're, controlled airspace, commercial flights. So the last thing I'll do quick on this one, and maybe if we want to get through a few more, just kind of do some quick hits. This is under the same heading, but this is because of surveillance. This was Washington Post on Christmas Eve, December 24th. This is crazy. Colleges are turning students' phones into surveillance machines, tracking the locations of hundreds of thousands. This is crazy. So evidently this started off looking at how coaches, need to make sure their students are going to class. And so a company has been formed, which is called Spotter EDU. And I did tweet a bit of a snarky, tweet about, calling all educational authoritarians. If you'd love to, raise the stakes of your surveillance powers even more, contact Spotter EDU because they can gather thousands. I think this says something like 6,000 data points per day. And it doesn't use GPS. It's using like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and there are these beacons. Yeah, but it's crazy. It reminds me, I think, of an article we might have mentioned where, some helicopter parents are using this Life 360 app to make sure their, college children, I think some of them are daughters, I don't know if they all are, but anyway, their college children don't leave campus, and if they see them leaving campus, then they tell them, hey, you got to stay on campus. I'm going to, some of them threatened, not supporting their college education if they're not going to, stay on campus where they're supposed to. Just create, these are outliers, of course. I think that is particularly, I hope. But this is a company that's gone mainstream, and, at the university level, kids are showing up in record numbers because, it's not just a clicker. At Texas Tech, we had stories of teachers who were using these clickers for kids to check in to make sure they were in class, and then they would answer questions. And so some kids would show up with like 6 clickers because, their friends weren't going to be there, but they were going to get their friends to have the credit. I mean, this makes me think, hey, if I'm going to this school, maybe I'm going to opt out of having a smartphone, right? Oh, sorry, I don't have a smartphone. I guess you can't track me. So any thoughts you have, Jason? Or perhaps were you an early investor in Spotter EDU? I may be touching some sensitive topics here.
No, and I think that it goes back to this idea that we talked about at the top of the hour, that there is a bit of a crossroads. We have to determine that there's no doubt that you could make I'm not saying it's a persuasive case, but you can make a case for having all of this data because it leads to student success, right? If students aren't showing up for class, it's hard for them to be successul. And no, it doesn't matter what the target is. Student athlete, regular student body, the website of that Spotter tool seem to suggest that special events and the whole student body could also be targets of this technology. But at a certain point, like there's certainly diminishing returns. And also, I skipped a couple classes in college and I turned out okay, right? Like I would agree that 100% attendance is better than 50% attendance or 25% attendance. But, the use, it seems like that there's a lot of peril in what this data can be used for, right? And I'll give you another example of this. There's a longstanding tension between the fact that we send 18-year-olds, functional adults, according to the United States law, to college, and in a lot of cases, parents are paying for that. And yet, as adults, there is no right to educational data at the university environment, right? That there's a FERPA issue that prevents adults from having their parents have access to their educational records. It includes their grades, etc. And I do think there's a risk at some point with all this data that's going to start to complicate those walls that have been longstanding firewalls between what parents can access and what they can't. A good argument, or at least an argument can be made that, you know, these things lead to student success, but what is the cost in the surveillance state? And the term you like to use, Wes, surveillance capitalism, is real, and, you know, making money off of that is obviously a huge part of this as well. And you are probably tracked in ways that, even if you're not on campus, low energy Bluetooth, part of the point of that technology is to sniff around for Bluetooth devices, grab its hardware address, its unique hardware address, and then use that as a means of tracking where that phone goes next. If you're in a massive department store that uses low energy Bluetooth tracking, they know how long you spent in housewares versus men's clothing, or how much time you spent at the restaurant at the end of the day, and that's commercially usable data. So whether we want to turn our students into that kind of a, you know, I guess, McNugget of data, that's fine. But there's implications to that, right? And it's not as simple as, you know, the data is useful for identifying students at risk.
Reminds me about filtering, right? I think that IT departments in schools and other organizations have been given incredible powers to control the content which folks have access to. I will not mention names, but I shared a presentation in the last, few months in a school district where, oh shoot, we can't get to this website. I can't show you this, and at our school where I've been the technology director, we're very much more open. I haven't been living in that kind of an oppressive, I would say, I don't know. I haven't had these words roll off my tongue lately, but that it's the call for balance filtering. Draconian filtering would be what that might be thought of. And so, anyway, it's similar to that. Just because you have all these powers doesn't mean you should use all those powers. And I think in the surveillance, world, we're seeing that for sure, where cameras are becoming more ubiquitous, and especially as we hook up algorithms in the cloud to these sorts of things and allow analysis and things like that to happen, there are temptations, and folks that are involved in security 24/7 may be tempted to want to do things like, I've seen some products that would let us say, oh, show me all the white Jeeps that drove on our campus yesterday or within this window of time, but the degree to which facial recognition and all that, we should not become what China is today and where China is going today with their use of, I would say, oppressive surveillance technology. So where to next, sir?
Well, it is January 1st, the day of this recording. So, Wes, I'd like to wish you an extraordinary happy public domain day. Boingo noted in its Monday edition that January 1st, 2020 means that everything from 1924 and older is now officially in the public domain. And there are a lot of very prominent media properties that happen to be part of that. The song Rhapsody in Blue is now in the public domain, which means that no licensing is required to utilize that song in whole or in bits. The sheet music, at least, not the recordings, in a lot of cases would still be very, 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 very much copyrighted. Songs like Lazy by Irving Berlin, Santa Claus Blues, which I don't really have the Santa Claus Blues, but in case you do, that's there. And a number of prominent books and movies are also now included in that list. And one of the things, we've talked about it a little bit here, that Congress has really, really extended the protections for creators for copyright. And now the stuff that's going into play now is going to start to get a little more complicated as we're getting into more modern day properties. But lots of great stuff is going in the public domain, which means it can be used in a license-free way. And I think that's a very positive thing.
This is under our media literacy headline. Did I talk about that Which Face is Real site where you can compare which one was created by AI and which one wasn't? I'm thinking I might not have, since I put it in the show notes for tonight.
No, that sounds
okay. This is crazy. So there's a Verge article that goes back to February 15th. This person does not exist.com uses AI to generate endless fake faces. And then I think not our December 18th show, because that was our product and gift show. But I'm going to go back to December 11th and try to look under. No, maybe I did not. There's another article I need to drop in. Basically, folks, this is a website which you can use. I did a media literacy lesson before the break on this, and I think I'm going to do a more expanded version where students are going to be creating some things. They've taken this website, whichfaceisreal.com. And so there are folks, using artificial intelligence to be able to, create deep fakes. We've talked about that on the show, where somebody, especially like a public figure that has a lot of video, they can make them say just about anything they want. But this website, thispersondoesnotexist.com, actually creates photographs of folks who have never existed before. And they do that by, taking, elements of different faces and things like that, but they look so real. And so whichfaceisreal.com, is a head-to-head comparison. And there's different ways you can look for the patterns, like where the eyes are. They're always looking forward. So if you've got reflections in glasses, or my kids were enjoying, trying to do some pattern analysis of like, okay, so how do we tell, which one is fake? But these are being utilized now for disinformation campaigns, for Facebook profiles, folks that, yes, imagine this, actually live in Russia, and entities and groups that are running these kinds of pages. And a lot of these are, right-leaning, right-wing kinds of websites. They're not going to unsplash.com, getting pictures of real people, but then, repurposing them. You've probably heard people talk about catfishing before. Catfishing is a term where photographs of you or someone else are taken and then shown to an unwitting person, giving them the idea that, oh, look at me, look at my life, and they're trying. It's a scam. They're trying to get money from this person. Anyway, this is now happening as far as fake images where there's an endless supply, because literally when you click the refresh button on thispersondoesnotexist.com, that person will not exist again, because they have been created by this algorithm. And you can go to the bottom right corner of the website and get a little more information and links about how it was created. But the Verge article from February 15th, which I've got linked there, was announcing this. And so what I need to I guess I do. I've got it. Okay, yeah. So the follow-up article is December 12th, and this is from Lead Stories, and the title is Fake Faces, People Who Do Not Exist Invade Facebook to Influence the 2020 Elections, Part 1. And so, yes, there are folks who have never existed. Their faces were created by AI algorithms. Mysteriously, they are leading 10 or 20 different right-wing groups and communities on Facebook. And these folks are, they're not real. They're being operated by other, entities. And in some cases, these are extremely complex and sophisticated initiatives that are trying to build followerships and, pull the levers and push the buttons of folks, a lot of times with emotion and the ways in which people want to, get you to respond, to like, and to share. And they're doing this. This is the campaign, folks. This is the new political campaign of 2020. Are entities and groups that are building followings on Facebook primarily, but on other platforms as well, so that they can then slip in the negative ad, whatever. Some of these are also sharing a variety of authentic information as well as disinformation. And so I guess I'll do a shout out lastly to a really great article that's kind of an end of year, but it's by Mike Caulfield, who's at Holden on Twitter. I've mentioned him before. He has the SIFT, protocol or framework for media literacy. In his article for First Draft News, it says, year in review, abnormal things seem business as usual. So in addition to security being a really important topic to talk with folks, not just in the EdTech world, but just in our regular face-to-face life, talking to people about Well, who shared that? Do you know what group that is? We really need to avoid, number one, being emotionally manipulated because, oh man, that makes me upset. I'm going to share that. I'm going to like that. And then also, giving fuel to, in some cases, these are not United States groups. These are Russian groups. These are Chinese groups. These are groups that really want to further polarize and harm our democracy, and they're using these kinds of technologies. So that would be a great activity as you head back to school to share with teachers, share with students, whichfaceisreal.com, get a conversation going about the ways in which artificial intelligence is being utilized and being weaponized to try to spread disinformation and propaganda and to trick people so that we'll share a message that somebody wants to have boosted out there in media world. Sorry to be a downer there. That's the Debbie Downer.
Quite all right. Let's see. Well, I was just going to say, hey, well, here's some more hacked articles. Let's not maybe do those either. I think I'm out of articles that I've thrown in here, but
the Robocall article is positive. We could do that one.
That's just today, right?
Well, maybe there was a new one. This was from December 19th. Senate passes new limits on robocall sending legislation.
Trump signed it, I think, yesterday.
Okay, there you go. So we've talked about that on the show. It's almost crazy to, have your phone on these days. The iPhone has a feature in settings, by the way, go to settings phone, where you can choose to automatically silence callers that are not in your address book. Because it's just become crazy in some cases. How many robocalls. So I'm glad the government's taking steps to clean that up.
Yep, absolutely. And I actually, one of the things I really like about Android is that it does have a very robust system for identifying callers so they never come back again. You can mark them as spam. I think Google actually does something with that database. But I have to say, well, someone who's recently purchased a home and also someone who's recently finished paying off a car after 5 years of car payments, I probably get 25 calls a week from people that are trying to claim that I need to re-up my warranty, and that if I don't act now, I'm going to lose something. And then the fact that most of this goes to my wife because she's the first name listed on our mortgage, but the amount of people that send us information that is public record, right? Like when you take out a mortgage, it is a public record. When you purchase property, it's a public record. But they take that information and turn it into less than up and up sales opportunities. And I am looking forward to there being more enforcement there. I believe that this now increases the fine to $10,000 when you're caught doing this, I think, per instance of it, which would be extremely economically devastating, I would imagine. But I will say, I feel like calls have been maybe slightly decreasing in the last year or so, but I can't imagine that a fine alone is going to do it. We need to start finding some authentication technology. I know that the major telecoms are working on this so that it's just not as easy to spoof numbers and otherwise get phone numbers for nefarious purposes.
Ultimately, we're going to need a way, and this is where surveillance capitalism goes against this. We're going to need ways to effectively enter witness protection without being in witness protection. In other words, get a new phone number, not have that identifier, be able to be more anonymous. And we need phone system 2.0, which is not only SMS, and we've talked about, I think, a new update to media messaging, and I don't remember exactly what that was called. There's a new protocol that is coming about, but we need it bigger than that. Hey, there is one more article if you want to pick it up quick. I think you put in the what to expect from phones in 2020 from CNET.
Yeah, some of the stuff that's looking future and forward in the world, but there are the three things that I think that you will be able to see in 2020 when it comes to our mobile devices. First, obviously, foldable is a big deal right now, and both Samsung and Motorola have released a foldable Android phone. The early prototypes seem really fragile and a lot of hubbub and price, I might add, for relatively little functionality. But the foldable technology is real, and it's becoming more and more realistic and less fragile. And so that's definitely something you'll see coming up. Obviously, 5G is here now, and all the major telecoms have some rollout in some way, shape, or form. T-Mobile claims it's the largest. Verizon says that they're actually the largest. And then to a lesser extent, AT&T and Sprint are working on 5G rollouts. The problem, of course, is that 5G can mean lots of different things. And based on my reading of the situation, 5G may just be really fast 4G for some, where in other cases it's going to be game changing. Terabit is not an unrealistic speed. I did see a screenshot on. I read a lot of the telecom subreddits on Reddit. Someone on the Verizon network in Boston pulled down 1.7 terabits per second speed on their phone, and he said he couldn't get it again, but he did it once and grabbed the screenshot, and just extraordinary amount of speed is coming to you.
Again, this is where individual students are going to have a greater quantity of bandwidth to the outside internet than your entire organization does, via 5G. This is what is coming. So
right, absolutely. And then the other piece of technology was even better cameras. So I would imagine certainly in the high-end phones, but some of the better camera technologies are going to start to sneak in the medium and low-end phones, which I think is great news for those that like to create with their phones.
All right. Well, that's a good segue to Geek of the Week, because I think you have something related to phones there.
I do. So if you received something for the holidays that you are actually abandoning an older piece of technology, especially if you are invested in something like the Apple or higher end Android ecosystems, you should sell your old phone. Now, a lot of people, and I know this happens at the Fryer household, will end up handing down phones to members of your family. But if that's just going to go into a drawer, right now is the best opportunity you have to recover some of the value of that by selling it in one of two ways. And I have two recommendations here. One of them is a Swappa, which is something I actually picked up from Wes, and I've now both sold and purchased on Swappa, and it's a great service. I picked up both my parents' recent updated used phones on Swappa and had extraordinary experiences. I've also sold a device on Swappa, and it's much easier than doing it on eBay. And so a shout out to Wes for that recommendation. And then Gazelle will probably net you a lower price, but it's way more low hassle. Basically, if it's a phone that they're buying right now, they don't buy all phones, and oftentimes their price is lower than it would be otherwise, but they literally send you a box. You put the phone in the box, the check shows up a week later. And so several times when my family's done upgrades, we've been able to recoup some of the price of that hardware by selling to Gazelle. So Swappa and Gazelle will be my recommendations for getting red tech. And don't wait. A year from now, it's not going to be worth nearly as much.
I'll take a picture, but in our Walmart, we've got a machine that you can just sell your phone right there back. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out, because we actually do have a few things in some drawers, and yes, no time like the present to sell. My Geek of the Week is a podcast, and I've mentioned this. We've talked about it on the show before. This is the Humane Tech Podcast by Tristan Harris. You may remember us if you're a longtime listener, talking about Tristan Harris and the whole nonprofit that he started, because he was the design ethicist for Google, who has been, famously pointing out that social media platforms are designed to work psychologically just like slot machines. Well, he did a great interview called The Cure for Hate, and it's by the founder of a group called Life After Hate. On Twitter, it is M. Kaler, Mcaleer, and his name is Tony McKaler. And basically, this fellow was a right-wing white supremacist, and as a result of different life experiences, including a family, came to see that was not the choice that he wanted to be making for his life. And so it is a fascinating article, because what's continuing to happen, and is going to happen in 2020 elections, all this, is we've got huge influence and impact by fringe outlier organizations that haven't had the megaphones that they have today. And so I thought this was a great interview that Tristan did. This organization, Life After Hate, is definitely one worth pursuing. And one of the things he says is we can't just ban these folks, off of platforms, block their sites and, try to stop them from having any place to share. One of the things that the long tail, and they don't use that term, but the long tail has done is it's enabled, like-minded folks to be able to connect virtually far easier than they ever could before. And there's good examples of that, but there's also negative examples. And so he talks about how we as a society need to be engaging these folks and helping them find community and find constructive, positive relationships. find meaning and significance. Okay, this is far more than just saying, hey, we have a new technology, platform. It's going to solve all these problems. So these are human, political, psychological issues. So commend that podcast to you. So we are the EdTech Situation Room, coming to you generally on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, wherever that happens to fall for your particular time zone. You can find links to all of the referenced resources we have discussed today and more that we didn't have a chance to at edtechsr.com/links. Dr. Neiffer, where can folks find you when you're not sharing your wisdom here on the ether waves via StreamYard?
I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach, and I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education. Early bird pricing available throughout the month of January for NCC 2020 at the Washington State Convention Center in Seattle in March. blog.ncc.org or ncc.org. How about you, sir?
Awesome. And I'm W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog, speedofcreativity.org. I will be, so I've accepted the offer, presenting at ISTE this year on middle school digital literacy and media literacy. And you can find all the lessons and resources that I share for my 5th and 6th grade students that I have an opportunity to teach each day at mdtech.casady.org. So until next week, we encourage you to stay safe, stay savvy. Also, if you would take the time, give us a recommendation, a rating on iTunes and other places finer podcasts are curated. Let your friends know you listen to the EdTech Situation Room. Reach out to us on Twitter. Let us know that you're a listener. Let us know if there's a particular topic that resonated with you or something you'd like to hear us talk about, and we may visit about it on an upcoming episode. Stay safe, folks. And Happy New Year.